Part 1.
15-second hook. At 37,000 feet above California, two airplanes unknowingly aim straight for each other. Inside the cabins, passengers sip coffee and scroll their phones, unaware that in seconds, their lives will hang on a single decision. Alarms will scream, fate will hesitate, and what should have been a tragedy will become one of the most unbelievable survival stories ever recorded. The sky above California that morning looked harmless, almost peaceful. A wide blue canvas stretched endlessly, broken only by thin brushstrokes of cloud drifting lazily in the distance. Flight 914 lifted smoothly from the runway, its engines humming with a familiar, comforting rhythm that lulled passengers into routine. Business travelers adjusted their seats, a mother buckled her sleeping child, and a retired couple held hands, excited about finally visiting their grandchildren. For them, this flight was nothing more than a few hours suspended between two ordinary days. Up front, Captain Mark Ellison scanned his instruments with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent over 25 years in the cockpit. His co-pilot, Jenna Morales, younger but sharp and focused, ran through her checklist with calm precision. The weather was clear, visibility perfect. It was the kind of flight pilots called a gift. Far above the ground, another aircraft sliced through the same sky. Flight 332, a regional jet, cruised steadily along its assigned path. Its captain, Robert Hayes, was nearing the end of a long shift. He glanced at the clock, already thinking about dinner with his family. His first officer joked lightly about how smooth the ride had been so far. Neither crew knew that somewhere in the invisible web of air traffic routes, something had gone terribly wrong. In a control room hundreds of miles away, air traffic controllers monitored dozens of blips moving across glowing radar screens. Each represented lives, stories, futures. For hours, everything flowed perfectly, like a choreographed dance. Then, in a moment too small to notice at first, a minor adjustment was entered. A routine instruction. A simple altitude change. No one realized that two aircraft were now climbing and cruising toward the same invisible point in the sky. Back inside Flight 914, the seatbelt sign flickered off. Passengers relaxed further. A flight attendant pushed her cart down the aisle, smiling as she handed out drinks. The engines maintained a steady roar, masking the silent danger growing closer with every passing second. Then, without warning, a sharp electronic voice cut through the cockpit. Traffic, traffic. Captain Ellison's heart jumped. His eyes snapped to the display. Jenna leaned forward instantly, her training taking over. "Where is it?" she asked, scanning. Before either could answer, the warning escalated.
Climb.
Climb. At the same moment, in the cockpit of Flight 332, the same alarm blared. Descend. Descend. For a split second, confusion reigned. Two aircraft, same altitude, closing fast, each receiving opposing commands from their collision avoidance systems. The margin for error was measured in seconds and feet. Ellison's voice stayed steady, though his pulse pounded in his ears. Autopilot off. I have control. Jenna's fingers flew across switches. Traffic at 12 o'clock. Extremely close. Inside the cabin, passengers sensed the change before they understood it. The plane jolted slightly, then began an aggressive climb. A man gripping his armrest felt his stomach drop. Drinks sloshed. A baby began to cry. "What's happening?" someone whispered. On the ground, near a small town nestled among rolling hills, a construction worker shaded his eyes and looked up. He saw two silver shapes racing toward each other, impossibly close. His breath caught. "Oh my God," he murmured. In the cockpit of Flight 332, Captain Hayes reacted instinctively. He pushed the nose downward, fighting the urge to hesitate. His first officer called out airspeed and descent rate, her voice tight but controlled. "Come on," Hayes muttered under his breath. The sky seemed to hold its breath. Passengers aboard both planes felt forces they had never experienced before. Gravity pressed them into their seats. Some screamed. Others prayed. A woman clutched a necklace and whispered goodbye to no one in particular. A teenager texted his mother with shaking hands, not knowing if the message would ever send. Ellison's aircraft climbed sharply. Alarms blared. Warning lights flashed red and amber. Training screamed at him to trust the system, to trust his instincts. There was no time for doubt. Then, in a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, the unthinkable almost happened. From the cockpit window, Ellison caught a glimpse of the other plane. It filled his vision, close enough to see the windows, close enough to imagine the faces inside. Jenna gasped. The planes missed each other by a margin so small it defied belief. Later estimates would suggest just a few hundred feet vertically, less horizontally. Close enough that wake turbulence rocked both aircraft violently. The danger wasn't over yet. Flight 914 shuddered as invisible air currents slammed into its wings. The aircraft rolled slightly, then steadied. Ellison fought the controls, his jaw clenched. "Easy, easy," he murmured. Inside the cabin, oxygen masks dropped without warning. Panic erupted. Screams echoed. Flight attendants shouted instructions, their own fear hidden behind professional calm. "Put the mask over your nose and mouth. Secure your child first." On Flight 332, the sudden descent sent unsecured items flying. A man hit his head against the overhead bin. A woman sobbed uncontrollably. The plane shook as if protesting the violence forced upon it. Then, slowly, mercifully, the alarms stopped screaming. Silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the steady hum of engines. Ellison leveled the plane. Jenna exhaled shakily. They exchanged a look, no words needed. They were alive. On the ground, witnesses stared in disbelief as the two aircraft diverged, each continuing on its path, damaged perhaps, shaken certainly, but still flying. Emergency calls flooded in. Radar screens lit up with alerts. Controllers realized what had nearly occurred, horror washing over them in waves. Back in the cabin, passengers looked at one another, eyes wide, faces pale. Strangers held hands. Some cried openly. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to process how close they had come to death. A flight attendant knelt beside an elderly man who was shaking uncontrollably. "You're okay," she said softly, though her own hands trembled. "You're safe now." Hours later, when both planes landed safely, applause erupted through the cabins. People hugged strangers. Some kissed the ground as they stepped off the aircraft. Many would later say they felt changed, as if they had been given time they were never supposed to have. Investigations would follow. Reports would analyze data, altitudes, systems, and human decisions. Experts would debate whether it was skill, technology, luck, or something more. But for those who lived it, the truth felt simpler and more mysterious. They had stared into the face of the impossible and survived. Part 2. In the hours after the near collision, shock clung to everyone like a second skin. Even as Flight 914 rolled safely onto the runway, Captain Mark Ellison's hands still trembled slightly on the controls. He kept his face composed, but inside his chest, his heart felt like it had just finished running a marathon. Jenna Morales removed her headset and stared straight ahead for a moment, replaying the image burned into her memory, the other aircraft filling the windshield, impossibly close. Only once the engines powered down did the reality sink in. In the cabin, applause faded into quiet murmurs. Passengers stood slowly, legs weak, eyes searching for something solid to anchor them back to normal life. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit wiped tears from his face, embarrassed but unable to stop. Nearby, the mother who had buckled her sleeping child earlier now held him tightly, kissing his hair over and over as if afraid he might disappear. Flight attendants moved through the aisle, checking on everyone, offering water, reassurance, and steady voices. One of them, Laura Chin, paused in the galley and finally let herself breathe. Her knees felt unsteady. For years she had trained for emergencies, fires, evacuations, decompressions, but nothing truly prepares you for the moment when you think the sky itself is about to end. From the cockpit speaker, Ellison's voice came through, calm but heavy with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I know what you just experienced was frightening. I want you to know that we are safely on the ground, and every single one of you handled that situation with incredible strength. Thank you for trusting us." That trust lingered in the air like a fragile thing. Across the state, Flight 332 landed at a different airport under similar circumstances. Captain Robert Hayes shut down his engines and leaned back in his seat, eyes closed. His first officer broke the silence quietly. "That was too close." Hayes nodded. "Closer than I ever want to be again." On the tarmac, emergency vehicles waited, lights flashing though no flames burned. Medics boarded to treat minor injuries, bumps, bruises, shock. No one had died. No one had even been seriously hurt. Statistically, it felt impossible. Within hours, news of the near disaster spread. Headlines appeared online, then on television screens across the country. Planes nearly collide over California. Mid-air disaster averted by seconds. Grainy videos taken by witnesses on the ground circulated endlessly, showing two aircraft crossing paths far too close for comfort. Commentators spoke in hushed tones, replaying the footage again and again, as if repetition might somehow make sense of it. Aviation experts were quick to explain the basics: traffic collision avoidance systems, pilot training, redundancy, but even they struggled to hide their awe. One former pilot shook his head during an interview. "You don't survive something like that without a chain of things going right," he said. And usually chains break. Behind the scenes, investigations began immediately. At an air traffic control center, supervisors pulled logs, recordings, radar data. Controllers involved in the incident were escorted into quiet rooms, pale and shaken. One of them, a young man named Daniel Reyes, stared at the table in front of him, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. He replayed the moment over and over, the altitude change, the confirmation, the routine nature of it all. Nothing had felt wrong at the time. "How did this happen?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Investigators from the FAA arrived within hours. They listened to cockpit voice recordings, tracing every word spoken in those critical seconds. They mapped flight paths down to the smallest detail. Charts filled walls. Timelines stretched across whiteboards. What emerged wasn't a single catastrophic failure, but a fragile sequence of small ones. A miscommunication here. A delayed update there. A controller juggling too many aircraft during a busy window. Alone, none of them would have caused disaster. Together, they nearly did. And yet, woven through that chain of errors was something else entirely. In both cockpits, pilots had trusted their training completely. When the alarm sounded, they did not freeze. They did not debate. They acted. Ellison disengaged autopilot instantly. Hayes committed fully to the descent. Their decisions aligned perfectly with the automated systems, creating a narrow corridor of survival. Even timing played its role. Had either aircraft been traveling just a few knots faster, had one pilot hesitated for even a second, the outcome would have been devastating. Passengers began sharing their stories online. One woman wrote about how she had been afraid of flying her entire life and had almost canceled the trip. Another described locking eyes with a stranger across the aisle as the plane climbed violently, both of them certain it was the end. A college student admitted he had been recording a video message to his parents when the alarm stopped. "I don't know why we're still here," he wrote, "but I know I won't waste it." Psychologists later explained that surviving a near-death experience often changes people in unexpected ways. Some feel overwhelming gratitude. Others struggle with anxiety. Many feel both at once. Mark Ellison felt it too. That night, after returning home, he stood in his backyard staring up at the same sky that had nearly taken everything from him. His wife joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist without saying a word. He leaned into her, feeling the steady proof of being alive. "I saw it," he finally said quietly. "The other plane. I can't stop seeing it." She held him tighter. "But you didn't hit it." "No," he replied. "We didn't." Jenna Morales couldn't sleep for days. Every time she closed her eyes, the alarms returned, sharp and unforgiving. Eventually, she talked it through with fellow pilots, with counselors, with her family. Slowly, the fear loosened its grip, replaced by a deeper respect for how thin the line truly is. Captain Hayes experienced something similar. He found himself more patient with his kids, more present at home. Small annoyances no longer mattered the way they once had. He had looked directly at disaster and lived to tell the story. Weeks later, preliminary findings were released. The public wanted answers, someone to blame, a clear explanation. What they received instead was a complex picture. Human error had played a role, yes, but so had human excellence. Technology had both failed and succeeded. The system had bent, but it had not broken. Aviation authorities announced new safety measures, revised protocols, additional training. Changes born from the knowledge that next time, luck might not be enough. Still, people asked the same question over and over. Was it skill? Was it fate? Or was it something else entirely? Witnesses on the ground were convinced they had seen a miracle. One man insisted he had closed his eyes, unable to watch the impact he was certain would happen. When he opened them and saw both planes still flying, he dropped to his knees. "I don't even believe in miracles," he said later. "But I saw one." For the passengers, the memory never faded completely. Every flight afterward carried a quiet echo of that day. The hum of engines sounded different. Turbulence felt heavier. But so did gratitude. Every safe landing felt like a gift. Some stayed in touch, forming an online group to share updates about their lives. Weddings, new jobs, births, small moments that now felt larger than they ever had before. They joked about being members of a club no one wanted to join, but were grateful existed. As for the sky above California, it returned to its usual calm. Planes crossed invisible highways daily, guided by systems and people doing their best. Most passengers never knew how close tragedy had come on that clear morning. But for those who did, the memory remained etched into their bones. Because sometimes, survival itself feels unbelievable. Part 3. Months passed, but the event refused to fade into history. Instead, it settled into the lives of everyone involved like a quiet echo, resurfacing in unexpected moments. For some, it arrived in dreams. For others, it appeared in the pause before boarding a flight, or in the way they looked a little longer at the people they loved. The official investigation continued, slow and methodical, peeling back layers of data with almost surgical precision. Every second of flight time was reconstructed. Every spoken word from the cockpits was transcribed, analyzed, and replayed. Investigators listened not just for what was said, but how it was said, the calm, the urgency, the subtle shifts in tone that revealed how close chaos had come. In one recorded exchange, Captain Ellison's voice remained remarkably steady. No panic. No hesitation. Just action. The experts noted it with quiet admiration. Years of experience had compressed into a single instinctive response. But behind that professional calm was a human cost few reports could capture. Ellison returned to flying after a mandatory break, but his first trip back into the cockpit felt different. As he climbed to cruising altitude, the numbers on the display meant more than they ever had before. Every blip on the radar felt personal. He double-checked everything, then checked it again. Not out of fear, but respect. Jenna Morales noticed the same shift in herself. She had always been confident, capable. Now, she was hyper-aware. She listened more closely to every radio transmission, watching the skies with renewed intensity. At first, she worried that the edge she felt might be weakness. Later, she realized it was something else entirely, a sharpened sense of responsibility. Meanwhile, on the ground, passengers carried their own invisible scars. One man, Daniel Whitaker, a software engineer who had been seated near the wing on Flight 914, found himself replaying the moment endlessly. The jolt. The screaming alarms. The woman beside him clutching his arm so hard it left bruises. They had never exchanged names, but in that instant, they were bound by shared terror. Weeks later, Daniel tracked her down through the online group formed by passengers. Her name was Maria. They met for coffee, awkward at first, then laughing nervously at how surreal it felt to sit calmly across from each other. They talked for hours, not just about the flight, but about life, regrets, things left unsaid. "I thought it was over," Maria admitted quietly. "I remember thinking, this is how it ends." Daniel nodded. "Me too. And now everything feels louder, brighter." Some passengers sought therapy. Others leaned on faith. A few avoided flying altogether, choosing long drives instead of short flights, even when it meant inconvenience. No one judged them. Everyone understood. The media attention slowly faded, replaced by newer headlines, newer crises. But occasionally, the story resurfaced. A documentary teaser. An anniversary article. A late-night show host shaking his head and calling it 1 in a billion. Experts debated probabilities. They spoke of vertical separation minimums, transponder accuracy, reaction times measured in fractions of seconds. They used numbers to explain something that felt almost emotional in nature. But numbers couldn't explain the witnesses. The construction worker who had watched from the ground still remembered the sight vividly. He could describe the angle of the planes, the way one seemed to leap upward while the other dipped just in time. He had told the story dozens of times, and every time, his voice caught at the same point. "I was sure I was about to see something terrible," he said. "I don't know how to explain it, but when they missed each other, it felt like the world exhaled." Even some air traffic controllers struggled with lingering doubt. Daniel Reyes, the controller involved in the altitude instruction, returned to work after extensive review and retraining. Officially, he had followed procedures, though circumstances had aligned disastrously. Unofficially, guilt gnawed at him. He sat at his station each day, watching planes move safely across his screen, haunted by the knowledge that a small variation could change everything. He became meticulous, slower to issue commands, always double-confirming. One night, after a long shift, he pulled up the incident report again, reading it alone in the dim glow of the control room. He stopped at a single line that mentioned pilot response time. Less than 5 seconds. 5 seconds had separated normalcy from catastrophe. That thought followed him home. Across the aviation community, the incident became a case study. Pilots in training watched simulations recreating the near collision. Instructors paused the footage just before the closest point, asking students what they would do next. The room always went quiet. The answer was never simple. Some students admitted later that the scenario terrified them. Others said it inspired them to rise to the level required when everything goes wrong at once. Captain Hayes was invited to speak at one such training session. Standing before a room of young pilots, he didn't dramatize the event. He didn't need to. "I trusted my training," he told them plainly. "But I also trusted the people flying the other plane." That's the part we don't talk about enough. You're never alone up there, even when you can't see anyone. That idea lingered with many of them. Trust. Timing. Human judgment layered over machines designed to protect life. As the anniversary of the incident approached, several passengers planned to meet in person for the first time. They chose a quiet park overlooking the ocean, the same sky stretching endlessly above them. Some brought families who had only heard the story secondhand. Others came alone, unsure what they felt but knowing they needed to be there. They shared stories, laughter, tears. One woman read aloud a letter she had written but never sent, to herself, to the universe, to whatever had spared them that day. No one interrupted. At one point, a plane passed overhead, small against the blue. Instinctively, several people looked up. There was a pause. Then someone smiled. "It's okay," another said softly. For Ellison and Morales, the day passed quietly. Neither sought attention. Neither felt like a hero. They knew how thin the margin had been, how easily the story could have ended differently. Still, when Ellison received a handwritten letter from a passenger thanking him for giving us our lives back, he had to sit down before opening it. He read it slowly, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer where he kept a few other reminders of why he flew. The investigation eventually concluded with no single villain, no dramatic punishment. Instead, there were changes, procedural updates, improved coordination, renewed emphasis on communication. The system learned, as it always tried to do, from near disaster. Yet the question refused to disappear. Was it just a perfect storm of skill and luck? Or had something intervened in that narrow space between impact and survival? Even the most rational minds admitted there was something unsettling about how precisely everything had aligned. Not one coincidence, but many, each dependent on the last, each necessary. The sky had allowed them to pass. And for everyone who had been there, who had felt the alarm scream and the plane lurch violently toward the unknown, that knowledge lingered quietly, profoundly. Because once you've been that close to the edge, you never see the world the same way again. Part 4. As time moved forward, the story took on a life of its own. It was no longer just a near collision logged in official records, but a shared memory carried by hundreds of people who had unknowingly stood at the edge of the same invisible cliff. The farther away the day became, the more people struggled to describe what it truly meant to them. For some passengers, the impact surfaced in subtle ways. A woman who had been afraid to speak up at work found herself more assertive, less willing to postpone her dreams. A retired teacher finally booked the solo trip she had always talked herself out of. A young couple who had been arguing quietly about the future on the flight got engaged less than 6 months later. None of them claimed the experience had magically solved their problems, but it had rearranged their priorities. "It's strange," one passenger said during a recorded interview. "I don't feel like I survived something dramatic. I feel like I was returned to my life with clearer eyes." The aviation world continued to reference the incident in hushed, respectful tones. News safety briefings included it as an example of why redundancy existed and why humans still mattered. Engineers refined systems. Trainers emphasized decisive action. But behind the technical improvements was an unspoken understanding. There would always be moments when logic alone was not enough. Captain Mark Ellison noticed the shift whenever he walked through an airport. He wasn't recognized often, but occasionally someone would pause, searching his face, then quietly say thank you. He never knew what to say in response. He hadn't felt brave in those seconds above California, only focused. The idea of heroism felt misplaced when he knew how little control anyone truly had once the margins vanished. Jenna Morales, now more seasoned, found herself mentoring younger pilots. She spoke honestly about fear, not as something to eliminate, but something to respect. "Fear means you understand the stakes," she told them. "The trick is not letting it take the controls." Her words carried weight, shaped by experience no simulator could fully replicate. Meanwhile, Captain Robert Hayes made a decision that surprised even himself. After decades of flying, he announced his retirement earlier than planned. Not because he was afraid, but because he felt complete. "I've had a good career," he explained to colleagues. "And I want to leave while I still love it." He began volunteering with aviation safety programs, sharing his experience with students and investigators alike. He spoke often about trust, not just in machines but in people. His message was simple. Aviation was a collective effort, and survival depended on everyone doing their part, even when no one was watching. The public fascination with the story reignited when a television series dedicated an episode to the incident. Reenactments dramatized the final seconds before the near collision. Slow-motion graphics showed the razor-thin gap between the aircraft. Narrators spoke of fate, coincidence, and the limits of human understanding. Some passengers chose not to watch. Others did, sitting in silence as the screen replayed what they had lived. A few said the episode helped them process the trauma. Others felt it simplified something too personal, too complex. One thing was certain, the question lingered more than ever. Was it a miracle? Scientists resisted the word. They preferred explanations grounded in physics and probability. And yet, even among them, there was an admission that probability alone struggled to capture the emotional truth of the event. When so many variables align perfectly, when survival hangs on seconds and inches, the outcome feels less like chance and more like intervention. Religious leaders from different faiths spoke publicly about the incident, each framing it through their own beliefs. Some called it divine protection. Others called it a reminder of human fragility. Passengers listened, taking what resonated and leaving the rest. The truth, perhaps, was that no single explanation could fully contain what had happened. On a quiet afternoon, nearly 2 years after the incident, several of the flight crew members reunited privately. There were no cameras, no reporters, just people who had shared something extraordinary. They sat around a table, coffee growing cold as conversation drifted between light-hearted memories and moments of silence. At one point, Jenna broke the quiet. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if just one thing was different?" Ellison nodded slowly. "All the time." Hayes leaned back, folding his hands. "I try not to," he said, "because it leads nowhere good." They sat with that for a moment. "I don't know what saved us," Jenna said finally, "but I know it wasn't just one thing." Ellison smiled faintly. "No. It was everything." Outside, planes continued their steady ascent and descent, tracing invisible paths across the sky. Most people beneath them never looked up. They trusted the system without thinking about it, as they always had. And for the most part, that trust was well placed. Still, the near collision had changed something fundamental. It reminded those who understood aviation best that safety was not a static achievement. It was a living, breathing process, renewed with every flight. Passengers who had been there that day continued to carry the memory forward. Some kept journals. Others shared the story with their children, not to frighten them, but to teach them gratitude. A few said they felt a responsibility to live differently, more intentionally, because they had been given a second chance without ever asking for one. On the anniversary each year, a handful of them paused wherever they were. Some looked up at the sky. Others simply closed their eyes. There was no ceremony, no official recognition, just a quiet acknowledgement of what might have been. For air traffic controller Daniel Reyes, the memory softened with time, but never disappeared. He became a trainer, using his experience to guide new controllers through the weight of their responsibility. He never dramatized the story. He didn't need to. "Take your time," he told them. "Lives depend on it." The phrase carried a depth few could fully grasp until they lived it. As the years passed, the story shifted from shock to reflection. It became less about the fear and more about the aftermath, the way survival reshapes perspective. The way ordinary moments gain new meaning when you understand how fragile they are. Perhaps that was the true miracle. Not that two planes missed each other by inches, but that hundreds of people walked away with a deeper awareness of being alive. Final part. Years later, the sky over California looked no different than it had on the day everything almost ended. Clear. Vast. Indifferent. Planes continued to carve silent paths through the blue, carrying people who trusted they would arrive safely, just as they always had. Life, from a distance, appeared unchanged. But for those connected to the mid-air miracle, nothing was ever quite the same. Time had softened the sharp edges of fear, but it had also deepened the meaning of what they survived. The memory no longer struck like lightning. Instead, it lived quietly in the background, influencing decisions in ways that were hard to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. One passenger, a man named Trevor, later described it best. "It's like you're always aware of a hidden layer of reality," he said. "Most people walk around thinking tomorrow is guaranteed. I don't. And strangely, that makes life feel richer." Trevor had been on his way to a job interview that day. He got the job, stayed with the company, built a career. But he often wondered how close all of it had come to never happening. Every promotion, every ordinary morning commute felt borrowed, in the best possible way. For Maria and Daniel, the two strangers who had clung to each other during the climb, their bond deepened over time. What began as shared trauma slowly turned into something gentler and more hopeful. They supported each other through lingering anxiety, through moments when turbulence brought the memories rushing back. 3 years after the incident, they stood together in a small courthouse, hands intertwined, promising a future neither of them had been sure they'd live to see. At the reception, someone joked about destiny. Maria smiled, but later whispered to Daniel, "I don't know about destiny. I just know we're here." Captain Mark Ellison continued flying for several more years. He never sought recognition, but within the industry, his name carried quiet respect. Younger pilots listened closely when he spoke, not because he dramatized the event, but because he never pretended it was anything other than terrifying. "There's no shame in admitting how close it was," he once told a group of trainees. The shame would be forgetting. Eventually, Ellison retired. On his final flight, as the plane descended smoothly toward the runway, he felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear this time, but gratitude. He looked out the window at the sprawling landscape below and thought of all the landings he'd made, all the lives entrusted to him, and the one moment that defined everything else. Jenna Morales rose quickly through the ranks, becoming a captain herself. On her first flight in command, she paused before takeoff, hands resting on the controls. She remembered the alarms, the closeness of the other aircraft, the way calm had emerged from chaos. "Ready when you are," her co-pilot said. She smiled slightly. "Let's go." Captain Robert Hayes, now fully immersed in safety advocacy, watched the aviation world evolve. New systems reduced risk further. Training improved. Data sharing became more seamless. The industry learned, as it always had, from the edge of disaster. Still, Hayes reminded people that no system could ever eliminate risk entirely. "Flying isn't about removing danger," he said during a conference. "It's about managing it together." Air traffic controller Daniel Reyes found peace in teaching. The guilt he once carried transformed into purpose. Every student he trained represented a future flight that might go safely because of the lessons learned from that near miss. He never framed himself as a cautionary tale. Instead, he emphasized responsibility, communication, and humility. "If you ever feel rushed," he told them, "slow down. The sky isn't going anywhere." The passengers' online group slowly grew quieter over the years, not because the bond weakened, but because life filled in the space around it. Messages appeared less often, but when they did, they mattered. A birth announcement, a photo from a mountain hike, a simple note that read, "Thinking of you all today." On the 10th anniversary, a few members gathered once more, smaller in number now. They stood together in silence, watching planes pass overhead. No one cried. No one spoke at first. Finally, someone said, "We were so sure it was the end." "And it wasn't," another replied. That was enough. The world moved on, as it always does. New stories captured attention. New dangers emerged. But the mid-air miracle remained etched quietly into aviation history, not as a headline, but as a reminder. A reminder that technology matters, but people matter more. A reminder that experience and instinct can meet chaos head-on. A reminder that survival is sometimes decided in seconds no one ever sees. For viewers watching this story unfold, the question still lingers. Was it skill, fate, or something beyond human understanding? The honest answer may be all of it, because skill put the pilots in position to act. Training gave them the courage to trust their instincts. Technology provided warnings just in time. And timing, impossibly precise, allowed every decision to matter. Whether you call it luck or miracle depends on what you believe. But for those who lived it, the label matters less than the outcome. They walked away. They went home. They lived. High above California, on an ordinary day that almost became a nightmare, two planes crossed paths and somehow did not collide. In that narrow space between tragedy and survival, something extraordinary happened, something that continues to echo long after the sky returned to silence. And that is why this story remains unbelievable. Outro. If this story left you holding your breath, remember this. Every safe landing carries thousands of unseen decisions, quiet acts of skill, and moments where timing means everything. The mid-air miracle in California reminds us how fragile life can be and how powerful human judgment becomes when it matters most. If you believe the survival was more than just luck, share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more unbelievable stories where reality proves it can be stranger than fiction. Until next time, keep looking up and never take a safe journey for granted.